All right, welcome to the explainer. So picture this. You have something that's designed to be completely unbreakable, but your job is to slice it open. How on earth do you do that? Well, today we're diving into a fantastic story about that exact problem and how a surprisingly simple tool, basically a fork, provided a brilliant solution. I know, it sounds like a total paradox, doesn't it? But this was the real-world challenge facing scientists who were this close to a huge breakthrough with a new, super strong composite material. You know how we use steel rebar to reinforce concrete? Well, this is the same idea, just way more high-tech. Engineers were taking these incredibly tough silicon carbide fibers, we'll call them SiC fibers, and embedding them in a ceramic material, zirconium diboride, or ZrB2. Okay, but here was the major roadblock. To see if the fibers were actually working, they needed to cut a slice of this stuff so thin you could look at it under a powerful microscope. The catch? The moment they tried to cut this super strong material, it became friable, which is really just a fancy way of saying it completely fell apart, crumbled into useless powder. So what do you normally do when you have a crumbly sample? Let's take a quick look at the traditional method and, spoiler alert, see why it absolutely did not work here. The standard technique was pretty simple. You'd take your sample, encase it in a strong epoxy, and then put that whole thing inside a copper tube for even more support. The problem was, for this specific ultra-hard composite, that just wasn't enough. Not even close. Every single attempt failed. It was impossible to get one single usable sample. And this is where the story gets really good. Because when the old methods fail, you gotta get creative. The researchers were totally stumped, so they came up with a brand new technique they called the fork method. Okay, so what is this fork method? Let's break it down. We're going to walk through how they built this clever little gadget step by step to see exactly how they finally cracked the code. First things first, they started with the material itself. We're talking about a tiny, incredibly delicate piece, carefully cut and smoothed down to just 1 by 1.5 millimeters. I mean, that is smaller than a grain of rice. The precision had to be absolutely perfect for the rest of this to work. Now for the fork. And no, not the kind you eat with. This is a custom machined support structure. They took a solid stainless steel rod and cut a very thin slot right down the middle. It was designed for one purpose, and one purpose only, to perfectly cradle that fragile little sample. Then, that tiny piece of material is fitted snugly right into the slot in the fork. That snug fit, along with a coating of a really strong epoxy, gave it the first crucial layer of reinforcement. It was the first step to keeping the brittle material from just breaking apart. And here's the final piece of the puzzle, the real master stroke. A 3mm copper tube gets slid over the entire fork. This is what made it all work. It clamps down on the steel, creating constant pressure and compression that holds the sample in a grip as tight as a vise. So they had this brilliant design, problem solved, right? Well, not quite. You know, science is all about trial and error, and even with this clever setup, there were still a few bumps in the road. And I love this quote from the actual research paper because it shows you the reality of science. Even with this clever new method, it didn't work perfectly right away. Their very first attempt using the fork still ended in failure. That's right, four separate times they tried to cut a disc, and 4 times it crumbled apart before they finally got a single one to stay in one piece. The method was promising, for sure, but it wasn't reliable enough yet. So the team put on their detective hats. They figured out the weak link was microscopic air bubbles getting trapped in the epoxy, creating weak spots. Their solution? A simple but critical adjustment. They started curing the epoxy in a vacuum oven, which would suck all those bubbles out and force the glue deeper into the sample. And that one tiny change made all the difference. On their next attempt, guess how many discs failed before they got a good one? Just one. They went from a huge failure rate to near perfect success. And that right there is the scientific process in action. You iterate, you refine, and you solve the problem. So what was the secret sauce here? Why did this specific material sandwich of a steel fork and a copper tube work so perfectly when nothing else did? Well, it was a brilliant combination of materials. The stainless steel is really tough and doesn't wear down easily during polishing, so it acts like a perfect shield for the delicate sample. At the same time, the copper tube is malleable but strong, so it provides that constant, steady compression to hold everything tightly together. And the results really do speak for themselves. The new refined fork method meant that 2 out of every 3 samples they prepared were now successful. Now remember, before this, their success rate was 0, nothing. So going from 0 to a 67% success rate wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete game changer. So after all that clever engineering and all that trial and error, what did they finally get to see? Let's get to the big reveal. And here it is, a perfectly stable 3mm disc, polished and ready for the microscope. This is the pristine sample that they had been trying and failing to create from the very beginning. This right here is success. And this is the ultimate payoff. This is why they went through all that trouble. For the very first time, scientists got a clear, head-on view of those sick fibers inside the material. They could finally see exactly how the reinforcement was behaving. And this isn't just a cool picture, this is the critical data they needed to make these amazing materials even stronger. It's just such an incredible reminder that the most elegant solution to a complex problem isn't always the most complicated one. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other simple, brilliant ideas are out there, just waiting to solve some of science's biggest problems?